It should be recording any second now. All right. Evening, fellas.
Hi.
So, how was everyone's New Year?
Quiet.
Yeah.
Very
Full of
subdued.
any science experiments there, Robert?
Still waiting on parts.
Yeah. Well, holidays, you know.
Yeah, well, I'm expecting them to arrive this week or next.
Right.
So I'm getting a breadboard, and I need some probes. And there's somebody on a two-stroke. I need some probes. So what I'm going to do is create the bolt antennas and see if there's actually a electrical discharge between, you know, an EM field being set up that's oscillatory with a round magnet. And if there's no current in there, then the guy who's posting his videos is lying to everybody. But if that's not the case, then we'll find out. So I've got a whole bunch of LEDs and diodes and transistors and capacitors. So we'll see what happens. I just got to be careful with the electrolytics that I don't wire them up the wrong way and cause them to explode. But yeah, so watch this space.
Well, it's just a short little paper that I produced last week, and Macon got it edited while I was away on break, and so it's coming out.
Yeah, I read that paper. It was interesting.
Just a short little, it's this little concept. If you know, holiness is the anode, morality is the plasma approximating, you know, the behavior, but
Well,
really, there's just nothing. There's nothing to show that morality is a very good MEMS at all. There seems to be a lot of cases that come to mind of morality being used as a weapon, and that's a problem. I reckon that ethics are probably a better MEMS overall, but we just need a lot more data. It's one of those things that got kind of assigned to me in my mind on my way to work on Monday last week, as I was sort of praying, which is actually prayer is a fairly good MEMS, but I'm not so sure. I'm not really sold on morality because first of all, they're so relative, culture to culture, person to person. There's very few absolutely, absolute right and wrong, absolute good and evil. I mean, but they're all definable. But all of those can be covered with ethics. So I'm not so sure that morality is a very, very good MEMS at all, based on my exploration there.
Does Brett know about this discussion?
Well, I doubt it. I'm not so sure that I don't think he's joined the Skype group. So
yeah, okay.
You're welcome to.
Just post something.
Of course, everybody. Just a reminder to everybody who would be viewing this on the gateway. If they go to the gateway, and then I believe it's communications. There are links on how to join the various Discords and Skype channels. Lots of different ways to get in communications with us. And also we have a list of shows. Of course, to be a show on this list, you got to be active, which we are active. And like Jay's channel is active. And although I haven't been on there in a long time, her Monday Night Live show is active, quite active. So all these channels are quite active. We might be removing the Uncharted X. I don't know. There's been some censorship and whatnot with regard to. I'd like to find a way to interface with the guy. I think he's just had a bad run-in with somebody somewhere other than Shockwave. Of course, they had a real bad run-in just there, right.
Well,
Merry Christmas.
I think the First Amendment should be applied to private organisations that control media.
it's quote his server, so I have no idea, what to say about that. But my thought tonight, though, we would go over a couple of little things and then I'll, open up the discussion and I'll do some gateway work here. This first one that came over, I thought it was cute. It was a cute article. I couldn't help but click on it because I have a thing for water bears. I think they're fascinating. I think that their designs are, they're fascinating, and the fact they can be extremely microscopic all the way to speck size, and then of course famously can survive anywhere. So this article, apparently what they're getting at is, can you quantum entangle these water bears and then perform the actual Schrodinger's cat experiment? And I found it fascinating read to go through listening to the arguments between the pro Schrodinger side, and they noted in the article that Schrodinger himself was not a fan of quantum by the end, thought it was nonsense. So he was proposing the cat as a way of demonstrating the nonsensical nature of it, and then they seem to have, in their opinion, proven the superposition. So I'd like to open up the discussion of that, and then I'm interested here that they're talking about. They actually talked about putting a tardigrade on top of a qubit, and then here's some actual experimentation where they put the tardigrade in at the 100 micrometer scale inside the circuit and ran the experiment. I felt bad for the tardigrade, but then again, they're sort of capable of surviving this kind of brute experimentation of going down to near absolute zero. So I thought I'd get everybody's opinion. Is what do you think about doing this form of experiment? Because as I understand it, the Schrodinger's thought experiment is more of a conceptual space, but if you were to actually do the experiment, you of course would see either a live cat or a dead cat. You wouldn't be able to see them superposed. But if they're using these electrical circuits to prove the superposition, maybe they actually could do the experiment. So curious who read this and what were their thoughts?
Well, I haven't actually read it, but the issues I have with Schrodinger's thought experiment is that it is a thought experiment. It's no different to Einstein's thought experiment for relativity. While imagining a solution is interesting, the question is, are you correct in your imaginings? And
well, but of course here they're talking about an actual experiment, which is interesting because it's nearly 100 years later.
But the problem with the experiment is that the experiment showing features that the speculation require, and what are the anomalies that are being produced in this experiment?
Yeah, 1935.
So you're
when
Schrodinger, he's a yeah. So the real issue here is where do we live? And the problem here is that the quantum experiments with Schrodinger's cats and the variants of it implies that you've got multiple timeline traces of causality. And so time in the way we really understand it is a causal process of event to event to event. Now, if a given event has multiple different outcomes, then you're going to produce multiple different timelines of causality. And we're making the mistake that thinking that we can just have all these timelines applying at the same time, and when we look, we
well, how do we know it's a mistake? I mean, in multi-dimensional or multiverse, it wouldn't necessarily be impossible, right? Because if time is not an absolute dimension, such as Einstein was suggesting, which I think is quite wrong, then there could be different streams of time going on, and each slice, each universe slice, even if they're right next to each other, could be experiencing changes in the time at a much different rate, and they could pass each other up and catch up and kind of oscillate back and forth. and only
Well,
occasionally interact.
yeah, well, we have statements and recorded results of people appearing from a country in Europe that doesn't exist that correlates to, say, Andorra or something like that. There's a guy in Japan who arrived on a flight and he had a passport and currency of a country that didn't exist, and a couple of days later he vanished. Now, is that a case of
Where
alternative?
would we find that? Where would we find that?
Oh,
Japanese
I,
man. Like,
you're asking me to um,
oh,
time.
I don't know.
Like
Yeah,
there's
I've never heard that
there's
case. Dana vanished
yeah,
administratively.
who vanished mysteriously as he came. Yeah, that's the one. Have a read of that. Um,
I mean,
so
I've had experiences just like that, personally, and so
so
I give a lot more stake to at least two dimensions, if not more.
so so the
But I
issue
don't
here
give
is
a lot to the string theory version.
the issue here is how does our conscious experience relate to timeline causality events? You know, do we live simultaneously in a multitude of timeline events, and this is where quantum goes off and says multiverse, which is the whole idea of multiverse is nonsense. You have a universe in which behavior occurs. There's only one universe. You don't have multiple ones. But anyway, with a timeline causality chains where you can have multiple occurrences of a history, how does our consciousness exist? And the way I would look at it is if we are a fractal being in the manner that the universe is fractal, then there's no reason why this version of us now is in a set or a single timeline experience, a causality chain, but our existence as individuals is spread across a multitude of those timeline experiences. And at some point, there's a resonance mechanism that allows us to consciously lock into a given timeline or set of timeline causalities. And we call that our experience. But the question we have is, what's the deal going on here? Because it's very hard to understand how this can work because we've got no, physical apparatus that has this idea of a time charge mechanism that allows us to swap in multiple time experiences. So we've got a past future charge type arrangement, the past being negative or positive and the future being, a charge arrangement, and how fast we travel through our timeline is depending on how close to the future or the past we are. So if we're closer to the past, then we travel slower type mentality, which gives you time dilation basically in the Einstein model. But that's one type of time. There's the cycle count of time, which is, what we use for clocks. And then there's this multiple causality chains, which is like a turning time into space type arrangement where you can go sideways or vertically or, in different directions. So the claim here is that, there's a, yeah, okay, rightio. So
I
proved
was just
false.
interested
It's
in
true.
to hear.
Yeah. So
They
the
did
real
not
issue,
appear.
here is, is it true and then just been lied about, or is it true and people can't accept it, so they just go looking for excuses to wipe it out? So anyway, it doesn't really matter because there are other evidences that were people who have walked from their house to the shops and basically gone into a
Oh yeah,
complete.
no. Well, one of the most famous things is that the Cherokee version of Bigfoot is known for this alternate dimension thing. The Cherokee, of course, had the story of Bigfoot long before the cultural phenomenon that started in the mid 20th century in America. And of course, Yeti is another example from out of Asia. And the Cherokee Bigfoot is known for this tendency to slip in and out of our reality. In which case, then you have quite the possibility. And I've personally had something like this happen that had to do with emails and our business partner. And she's well known to have a lot of strange things going on. Um,
Well,
But
there's a missing persons documentation where a guy is in a college house somewhere in the eastern states in the states, and it is midwinter, and he says, "Oh, I'm just going to go for a walk. I'll be back in a couple of minutes, in half an hour," and he literally vanished. Nobody could figure out where he got to, so they went looking for him, and they followed his footprints, and they found his pack, and he walked into the middle of a river, and it was all ice-bound stuff. So he was walking across the ice, and suddenly everything disappeared. No further trace of him. And then 18 months later, he turns up in the middle of a field 1,800 miles from where he started, with no recollection of what occurred in that 18 months. So it's almost like he walked into a travel tunnel that took him from where he was to where he ended up instantly, but in the process displaced him in time by 18 months. And these things are not made up. There was a flight that was coming into Miami airport, and they said, "Oh, we'll be landing in 10 minutes," and they hadn't arrived, and they were looking up, setting up for go search for the plane, and the plane lands and all the rest of it. And they said, "Where have you been? I forget how many hours late they were, or how many minutes, but anyway, 30 minutes or something like that." And they went in there and they checked the clock on the plane, and sure enough, it was 10 minutes behind the time he reported. But at Miami Airport, the time delay the time expired process was half an hour or an hour later. So these are what you call a time wormhole type mechanism. So is time possible? Time travel
what it's reminding
possible
me of,
in
first of
near
all,
death?
I want to say that I definitely do not agree with Einstein's version of that real experiments have to be done, and that's what they're proposing in this Schrodinger's tardigrade. But it's also reminding me of these UPARTs, and this is in a new paper. I haven't put this paper out yet, and I go through the top like 17 or so commonly talked about out of place artifacts, and then I give my own personal analysis as to what seems to have been occurring here. A strong number of them show evidence of electrogeological processes. So I do think that it's important that we look for the easiest rational explanation first. That does not mean, though, that we can discount these sort of time tunnel things. Very famously, of course, particle-antiparticle pairs have emerged out of nothingness inside of particle accelerators and then disappeared within nanoseconds or picoseconds. So it's very important that we keep an open mind on these kinds of issues and discussions, because there is something interesting happening. What
Well,
it is, I haven't exactly determined, but if we keep an open mind about some of these out of place artifacts, it's going to be very useful. But a lot of them, they do seem to be simply explained with electrogeology, and not all of them. And there are some really strange ones. I mean, it's a spark plug that seems to be getting easier. But some of these, of course, the birds, the dinosaur in the temple, um, human footprints that are way too old, according to them. Um, there's a lot of these kind of really strange materials, these huge pipes embedded in Chinese rock. Whenever we have these kinds of things, it's easy for us to jump to either the fantastical or the dismissive, and I don't like that tendency either way. Like, I think that Michael Shermer dismissing all this stuff, and the archaeology community dismissing all this stuff, it's a little too convenient, because of what they're acting like Lestrade, right? He's always dismissing the tiniest detail, and it turns out to be the detail that makes the difference in how Sherlock Holmes actually figures out who done it. And Lestrade is the epitome of how the archaeological community, what they can't figure out, they ignore as much as possible. And then you
well,
see something as seriously legit as the Baghdad battery, end up on Ancient Aliens, and that's the only place people were getting to see it. And it lends towards very fantastical explanations when there's obviously there was some scientist who was understanding DC electricity previous to Volta. I mean,
Well,
that's the straightforward explanation.
the issue you have with archaeology in particular is this view that 8,000 years ago we were running around chucking rocks at each other, and we're
Well, some
now
people were.
wonderfully
I mean,
advanced with nuclear weapons. But the simple fact is that we are the archaeology community, the consensus archaeologists are refusing to accept the evidence that they have available. You've got
sure.
evidence in the form of mythology. Now, mythology just doesn't get invented, and I can demonstrate
Sometimes it
that.
does.
By,
Sometimes
well,
it
no,
does.
you,
In
you
comic,
don't.
in
Well,
comic
you
book
don't.
world,
You
we
can
invent
do
all
this
sorts of
in the modern
mythology.
age. For the people who reckon I'm just rabbiting on about bullshit, go into Google search and look up the cargo cult religion and how it started in the Melanesian cargo cult religion. It was started in this during the Second World War, and if you look at that, you'll find that as the Americans and the Allies hopped across the islands, the indigenous population who had no previous experience of aircraft and guns and radio and all the rest of it built a brand new religion based on what they observed and didn't understand. Now, if you're going to sit down as an archaeologist and say that mythology is based on bullshit thinking, then you need to go and get your head. You need to hand in your degree and stop sucking money out of taxpayers.
I mean, but they take it to an extreme. So, some myths are new or invented. We invent myths in comic books and comic book movies all the time, but they always have a basis in some archetype or motif in which cannot be discounted. And that's one of the main things about these UPARTs is that we have to look also not just for the technological current through which they were clearly developed. I mean, this anti-theater mechanism did just fall out of nowhere. And it's not going to be a one-off, and it's also not going to be the first version. It's going to be part of an entire stream of consciousness and development. And so that exists in the concrete reality that is just buried, basically. I mean, essentially lost. And so uncovering that is going to take effort and work. And if they bury it figuratively, of course they haven't been capable with the Antikythera because the people are too fascinated with it. But other things, like these little balls here. I mean, there's something really fascinating to talk about with that, and they want to bury it figuratively, and the best way to do that is they just don't mention it. And
it messes up their nice little storyline, which is not true.
They don't like it.
And I mean, the classic example of it is, please describe to me how King Solomon's palace was lit. It's written there in the Bible. The people who claim the Bible is literally the truth need to explain to me how you can have a light source in Solomon's palace that needed neither oil or fire to produce.
Sure, here. Nothing coming up immediately. I mean, I would imagine that they were lit with mercury lamps, but that's just my imagination. I have no idea honestly.
But the explanation we have from the modern era to create light in an environment like an enclosed environment today, you need electrical light bulbs and all the rest of it. And we've got evidence of knowledge of electrodynamic plating of metals, and copper was an important tool.
For sure.
Copper.
Yeah, I'll say this categorically for the audience: the Giza Great Pyramid was a power plant, electrical power plant. That there is the evidence there is so massive. It'd be sort of like an archaeologist in 1,000 years finding a Model T Ford and going, well, this is clearly a bread box for manufacturing food. I mean, it would be kind of an asinine way of looking at it, or calling it a tomb. When we know based on all the evidence of the mechanical aspects of the engineering of what an automobile is, we could say it's definitively an automobile. In this case, we can say definitively they were producing electricity inside the pyramid. Now, as a, you know, until we build a scale model of it, we're not going to know how much electricity it was producing. Even with simulation, we really probably can't get it
The Russians
accurate.
have done.
We need a real model. We need a large working model.
Yeah,
About
we don't need a large working model. The Russians and many others have done serious investigations into pyramid energy and all the rest of it. It's well documented. The fact that consensus science.
Yeah, but that pyramid energy stuff, that's all like kind of a woo perspective. I'm talking about literally.
No, but the Russians have actually built pyramids, not out of stone, but they've built pyramidal structures, and you got the Louvre in France and a few other places.
Yeah, but none of those things are like Chris Dunn's machine.
But the thing is, the research that's been done is being poo-hooed by people that want to believe religiously.
It's easy to poo-hoo something that is not. The claim that is not an exact scale replica.
The claim by the Egyptologist crowd that I think they're frauds actually, is that Khufu built the Great Pyramid. There's no proof whatsoever that the pyramid was built 4,000.
Well, there's proof that he didn't. We now have proof that he didn't, and I can say that also.
So if we got proof that he didn't, well, the archaeologist guys need to go back to the drawing board and work it out
they
again.
Won't, though.
There's clear evidence that the pyramidal structure was set up in, what was it, 12,000 BCE, and because of astronomical alignments and all the rest of it, and we're insulting our past and our history when we come up with this crap. But the simple fact is, there's clear evidence that people in the past were able to do absolutely astounding things that we cannot do today. Please show me the technology today that allows us to build and move mill, I should say is a better way, extract 2,000-ton blocks of stone.
But that's a little apples to oranges, because we can demonstrate pretty clearly that the gravity environment was different. So if the gravity environment was different for us, we would do it.
But using today's technology, we can't even come close to doing that sort of stuff.
No, but we can make a scale. That's my point, is that we can make a scale replica of the pyramid. We could actually find out how much current and voltage they were able to produce with this power plant. I don't think they're going to be producing, enough to run supercomputing complexes, but what they were producing was a field strong enough to light bulbs, and certainly to appreciate the power of the force, and then to craft a society that was respective to the entire big G, because obviously they respected the gods and the Lord above, which they called Ra, Amun Ra, and then they would have respected the ether, and they would have certainly respected the physics, particularly the physics that affected their engineering design, and they clearly respected the numbers, because they respected numbers far more than we do. I think we respect more like data and the tool of mathematics, and try to worship it, rather than what the Egyptians seem to have actually really appreciated the numbers themselves, which is something only a few people do these days.
But the Egyptians, at the time of Solon going to Egypt and learning about Atlantis from the priests there, the Egyptian dynasties were 110. Was it 110 kings? Now, even if you put the kings at 30 years a pop, that's a long time. But anyway, I think it might have been 1,100. I forget what the numbers were, but anyway, some large number. So we have
the easy plug there, by the way, for people who don't know. You can go to my Ashes of Atlantis Part 1, where I debunk Jimmy's Rishat theory, and I actually have the entire Solon story in here, so people can actually read the entire thing, everything you need to know, just right from the horse's mouth, right from Plato, starting on page 11.
So we have this material that's both written and oral, that the the science community just refuses to acknowledge exists. And
Oh yeah, absolutely.
and if we've gone from, in the standard story of 4000 BC, we're chucking rocks at each other with some arrows and copper spears and all the rest of it, to nuclear weapons, some 6,500 years. What is impossible for me to accept is that we've only done this once in our entire history of the species. It is irrational to say that nuclear weapons is the first time round in 1945. Especially when we've got
I don't know if it's irrational. I don't know.
writings that imply that occurred in about 6,500 BC. And if
Well, that
nuclear
depends on.
if nuclear weapons
It
did
could
get
be
used at that time, then
better
all our
transition.
carbon dating process is bullshit, because the environment hasn't been stable as far as radiation is concerned. The nuclear war will change the radiation environment, and all our dating turn to
We've
custard.
covered this. Thunderbolt's much more powerful. So I can easily explain every nuclear theory with thunderbolts. So the question is, but you can't do that in reverse. You can't use nuclear to
No. And my claim is that the Earth is actually a star up in 100 miles above our heads, or however far up it is. We've got nuclear fission and fusion going on, and that stuff is creating heavier elements that will rain onto the planet. And that changes, that gives us a background input in terms of radioactive material into the Earth. And it's very local. So all our dating methods, turn to custard if nuclear fallout is raining down from our ionosphere on top of us. We've got to get our heads out of our ass, basically. That's the issue here. We've got to stop ignoring the facts that make our nice, lovely, cozy story turn to custard. We've got to admit the fact that we're wrong and get over it. But people are being paid to write bullshit and stories, and it's like Michael Degrassi, and is he an expert just because he's written heaps of papers? No, he hasn't proved anything. He's just written papers based on the story he grew up with, and where's the evidence to prove it wrong when there's all this stuff that proves it false? Yeah.
Well, so back to the entangled tardigrade here. They've actually done the experiment, but unfortunately, it doesn't actually prove out the concept. It's almost like they're doing it kind of as a fun joke, because they could. It doesn't really prove out what Schrodinger's said. The tardigrade does come, back to life, is observed to return to its active form after 420 hours at sub 10 millikelvin temperatures, setting a new record for conditions that a complex form of life can survive. So this paper is more interesting on a biological level than it is.
Yeah, but how do they prove the quantum bit?
That would be.
They've just put quantum in there to get people to read it. I reckon the only reason why quantum appears in this and the word entanglement and quantum appear is to get the damn thing published. Because it'd be a case.
Maybe, I don't know. They're introducing a qubit.
They get this tiny animal and they freeze it and it comes back to life. Well, there's nothing fancy in that. There's the weta in New Zealand that you can freeze.
Kind of impressive that it can go into
it's impressive.
I don't think that it proves Schrodinger's cat.
Doesn't prove anything.
But I do think that it
biologically
it proves that life is quite a lot more interesting fact. I think that it bolsters my case in EPMC for the laws of life, that life is an emergent property that's directly connected to the universe, and it may be directly connected to the reversal of the tendency towards chaos, that life may actually provide the anti-entropy. It may be creation of order. If you can take this complex, this is not a single cell, it's a complex organism, and you can take it down to almost 0 Kelvin, below 10 millikelvin, and then you can bring it back to its normal state. Who knows what forms of life that they're there may be out there that can go basically almost down to 0 Kelvin, and still function, proving to some degree that life is an inherent portion of, it's an inherent part of the universe. And I think that it's more interesting in that direction. And I think the rest of it is, rather than having fun with qubits and in the history of Schrodinger's cat, because I don't think that they've really disproven his thought experiment here, which again, based on his quote, he said one can set up quite ridiculous cases. So he's pointing out that quantum thought itself has a real problem with reality. But what's interesting is that you seem to have a problem with quantum, but quantum supports a lot of the various possibilities that you're talking about with
The issue I have with
altered
quantum,
dimensions, time.
the issue I have with quantum is that it is a fictional explanation. It's like a magic wand solution to explaining what
That's true. No, I'll agree with that. I'll agree with that. But it's because at some level, okay, this is the same thing you have with the whole magnetism and moving charge thing. One thing we know is that using the model that we have, we can produce electricity, and that we can make machines, and we can do a lot of things. You're saying that we haven't proved that the connection exists between the two, and yet we're able to use it. So it's sort of like, I could say a person doesn't understand a punch, but if they punch someone, I mean, and they're successful at it, I mean, to some degree, they must understand how the mechanics of a punch work. I could get highly theoretical as to whether they really understand the philosophy of the punch. But I mean, to some degree, if they're able to punch and the punch works, don't they really kind of understand it? I mean, to some degree.
I've got
maybe everything.
I'm agreeing completely with Robert Distinti here. What I'm saying is, just because we've discovered some mechanism that enables us to use, the magical thing called electricity, which I think is more than electricity in the first place, does not ever imply that we understand what's going on. All we've done is a bunch of monkeys is work out something that works, build stuff. So the real issue here
you're talking about these rules of acquisition. So for people who don't know, Distinti is a man who's put out a thesis on new electromagnetism, which improves on the Maxwell's model. And he's created the vortex algebra, and he's got a number of other things. He's got a blog, everything. But he's got this thing called rules of acquisition. And there's an entire playlist, which I definitely recommend people go through. And he logically shows that there are some real big issues in the West. Another interesting thing here is that he shows what Ken Wheeler's little experiment where Ken's saying that he's the only one who can explain it, and he steps through and he actually graphically shows what should be theoretically happening. So a good plug, I think Distinti is he's an electrical engineer. He works in electronics a lot.
Yeah, well, guys got to build devices that work, and this is what engineers do. You can hypothesize about how things work, like I do, or you can actually build something that actually does work, and it's important to make the difference. We've got to explain, as theoreticians and explainers of physical phenomena, why that phenomena has to happen. And I think in general, physics has failed to do that, and the quantum field has gone, off the deep end, literally.
I don't know. I have a question. Theoretically, is that really true?
None of their theories hold water. They keep coming up with a new discovery that breaks the model, and they refuse to throw the model
you're
out.
Making the statement that they have to figure out the mechanism. I'm not so sure that that's true. It's sort of like I love my kids, but I can't give you the mechanism for that. I can't prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt, but it's demonstrable in my behavior, and then I can tell you what I feel, and I can tell you based on my behavior and all of that. But as for finding an exact mechanism for what love is, this is something that's been used quite a lot. It's the same thing. Also, they've said, can you tell a blind man what the color blue looks like? You really can't. I mean, you can try. quite a bit, but if he's never ever seen color, then you can't really explain what the color blue looks like, because you're also not even sure everybody's seeing the same color. We have a theory that they are based on the mechanisms of their cells and how this is all working, but we do know that people slightly see colors a little differently, which puts in a huge conundrum, because when you look at the spectrum of green, when you zoom in on what you think is green, what is defined as green, you know, where you have a hexadecimal version of green, when you zoom in on that color in the spectrum, you really can't actually tell the difference of slightly green and slightly less green and slightly more green on each side. In case, philosophically, which one is the real green? You don't really know. And then now you've got to explain that to a blind person. And I think that that's the same problem that we have in physics, is that we can't really get at creating and finding the mechanism whereby magnetism and the moving charge are connected. But we know they must be connected because we've used them so many times.
Well, the issue here is, you know, there's a saying in Latin, and I can't remember the saying, but basically it says, we have events that appear to have a causal chain, but do they actually have a causal chain? And physics explanation at the moment is we've seen corresponding and correlating events, and therefore we make the assumption that these events are caused by each other. Now, we've got to be very careful in making that jump without the evidence of showing that there is a causal relationship. And when it comes to color,
I think that we should. I don't know that we absolutely have to find the causal relationship. Is what
well, do. If we want to properly explain the phenomenon we experience, we need to do that. But coming back to color, for example, what people call blue. Are you
saying that I have to know the mechanism by which I love my children to actually love my children?
Just let me get to where I'm trying to get to first.
Well, I'm challenging it. I'm challenging you to prove that.
I keep getting interrupted in the thought process.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You're making an assumption there about that we have to.
No, I'm not making an assumption. Let's back off of the love bit and get back to the color. Right. Now, what we call blue is a statistical average of everybody claiming that some spectrum that we look at or some object we look at is blue. And it's just statistical evidence. So you're talking about lies, damn lies, and statistics. And now statistics does not produce actual evidence. You know, it's just a correlation.
Here's what I'm saying. Okay, you tell me. You're looking
at if I get a magnifying glass and zoom in on my computer screen, I won't see, you know, the spectrum, whatever. What I'm going to see is a series of yellow, green, and red dots that look like it's green.
Right? Well, you're ignoring the simple analogy here. Okay, where's the real green here?
Yeah, forget that. What I'm looking at on my computer screen right now, where you fiddle around with those things, is a series of red, green, and yellow dots that, in combination, produce the color spectrum that's on the side. That line that goes from purple through to red and orange and all the rest of it, right? What we're seeing, what we're assuming we see, is not what's actually there. You know, our eyeballs only see three color spectrums.
This is the inside the container. Okay, we're not going beyond me seeing the opposite and the light that's emitting from the. We're just talking about on the screen inside of our box. Okay,
that's fine.
So but
what we're neglecting in this process is the simple fact that our brain is making up a story about what color it is we see based upon what our eyeballs receive from the screen.
Right, and we're all agreeing generally that this is green. Theoretically, this should be a 00FF00 is what it should be. I'm having a hard time actually generating that. I was hoping to.
But anyway, it doesn't.
I was going to make the point. I was going to make the point that each monitor is still slightly different.
Yes,
and so even when we
every eyeball is slightly different too. And everybody's brain process is slightly different.
All right, so now
you've got people that see a color and they smell it and they taste it.
Fair enough, but that's a topic. But now I'm telling you, your job now is to prove to me that I can definitively tell a blind person what that color looks like.
No,
even when you perfect
can't.
0, 0, FF 0, 0.
That's like
And I don't think
asking
it can be
a
done.
man to explain how what it feels like to give
Well,
birth
I'm
to a
saying that
child.
you might be demanding this of physicists.
I'm just simply, yeah, I am. I'm demanding that the
Okay,
physicists
well,
have
that
a
seems
better
nonsensical to
definition,
me.
right? The simple fact
I'm not
is,
sure it can be done. I don't. I think that the universe may be
well,
designed in a way that we cannot do it. I think that that goes back to the law of relativity.
well, it's our brains that are the problem here, our understanding that's the issue. It's not the universe. The
Maybe.
universe doesn't go to mathematics school, and it doesn't go to, recipe school of processes
I'm
and all the
not. I'm
rest of
not.
it. Just
I'm not saying it's the fault of the universe. That's not what I
yeah,
said. I said
it's
that it
all
may
of
be
our
the
understanding.
design
But
of the universe. Part of the design of the universe is that we should be defied in our attempts to understand it. I make a point, and again, going back to the same paper, that one of the things that we want to look for is, or in our current science, we want the triangle of reality to be, in order to make this jigsaw puzzle, and then go in and fill in the jigsaw puzzles. But then when we go to put it all together, we can't seem to get the puzzle pieces to work.
yeah, that's
And
because we.
in reality, what it probably is probably a Sierpinski set of triangles where there's a fractal, and the image is being divided up into similar images of different sizes, different scales, different realities. I have a hard time finding it in here.
Yeah, I've just come back to this while you go searching. In my speculation about the nature of things, I am claiming, quite dramatically claiming, that good and evil is a type of charge, that male and female is a type of charge, alive and dead is a type of charge, past and future is a type of charge, so that love and hate is also a charge. It's sort of like the law of opposites that you'll find in philosophy, is that stuff, to express itself in the universe that we experience, that stuff is built into the actual resonant structure of the seed particles that make everything we experience.
Sorry, it was in my Schnoll effect paper. I
So
apologize.
so we need to understand our construction is fractal. When we talk about an electron being a fundamental particle, well, it's the smallest, well, apart from the photon, actually, it's the smallest constructed particle that expresses a monopole a magnetic field and a dipole magnetic field. So you got a monopole electric field and a dipole electric magnetic field that is due to construction of that object in its own, and that the electrical characteristics are totally independent of the magnetic characteristics. And if I get one of these particles and I move it, then it will react electrically with other matter structure, and it will react magnetically with other structure. And the fact that these two things occur simultaneous to each other does not mean that one in motion produces the other. In fact, we can't prove that is true. So the assumption that cannot be approved implies that the assumption is false. And this is my coming back to these issues, so that the reason why this is important is this cross-generation of electric motion producing a magnetic field is fundamental to our understanding of how electrics work. And in the Maxwell equations, it's critical, because one of the equations says that a moving electric charge produces a magnetic field. It's there and there. Faraday's law of induction requires it. But there's another explanation. If we're talking about electrical interaction and magnetic interaction, then the induction process is I am moving a particle that has electric and magnetic properties, and it's producing a response in matter that is of the same construct, of which will react electrically and magnetically independent of each other. But the combined result, it looks like induction as explained by Faraday. And these are fundamental understandings, because what we know about Maxwell's equations that Oliver Heaviside built
From a
is
practical
that they don't work in all circumstances. They only
from
work
a
in constraints.
practical
They're good
perspective,
enough
though,
to
does it
they're good
matter?
enough to build a mobile phone, but they're not good enough to build, really tiny devices using atoms only. You run into problems.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
So So this is my issue, you know,
I just don't know that it's the problem yet. Maybe it is a problem in the future.
well, it's a problem
I have
in
no idea.
computing. I'll tell you that right now. You know, the width of the metal band along which electrical discharge mechanisms occur is critical. You know, the reason why we don't have atom-wide, you know, single atom conductors is because they don't work because of all the crosstalk interference of the environment that affects them. So they've got to be a certain, you know, physical width to work properly. So anyway, getting back to this, if the universe is described in the way I'm talking about, where you got the law of opposites, we've got, you know, things that are literally opposite, good, evil, love, hate, all the rest of that stuff. If that is built into the structure of matter at its basis, and everything is a complex built on top of that, you are going to get, whether you like it or not, life, sex, food, electricity and magnetism, because they go together. You'll get all these characteristics we see out there, ethics, which is good and evil, all this sort of stuff. It's there in the universe. We get a complex that builds these things up, and these things become expressed through construction into the grand scale. So, you know, it changes completely the way we look at things. And it's our understanding that's critical here. If we're not understanding what the processes are, then we're going to get the wrong story. You know, when Plato's model of the universe existed and we got the flat earth and all the rest of it, we're looking at the evidence that our senses provide us and coming up with an explanation of why these things behave the way they do. And that model worked until we changed our observational platform. Right? Magellan going around the world in the 1500s or 1400s proved that, you know, if you kept going west or kept going east, you ended up back where you started, which was a problem.
Let me interject and make a support for you. So this is from my Schnell effect paper talking about the relativity as an answer, and I make an example. This gentleman on the right, he produced a video. It's quite popular, in which he uses fabric, literal fabric, to be the analogy of space-time. The problem is, although it makes a very effective visual demonstration for the students, is that it of course is relying upon classical literal gravity in a vertical environment to create this effect. But in space, there is no up and down. And now here's the interesting thing is, no matter how much you roll these objects around each other, they'll never actually find a stable orbit. They'll always either roll away or roll towards the so-called object in the center, the star. And that is not what actually happens in space, of course.
Yes.
We have very stable orbits. Of course, they do have wobble and they move about, but they're not continuously. The Earth is not continuously spiraling towards the sun, and that's exactly what would happen in an actual fabric environment. And it's a problem that they use those kinds of models, and then it kind of dismisses away any kind of questioning.
The other thing is you've got a circular definition of how things are behaving, because you're relying on the fact, right? This diagram, this picture that you got there, uses gravity to show how gravity works. Well,
yes.
No, it doesn't.
Well, he's using even worse. He's using classical gravity to describe how relativity gravity works.
These things are not the same. But anyway,
yeah.
So what I'm complaining about in the quantum model is the fact that the quantum modelists themselves, there are, well, I think it's 8 or more different models of how quantum works. None of them apply in all circumstances. And on the basis of Occam's razor, they have to be wrong. The simple fact is I only need one experiment to show that my assumptions are false, and the speculation, no matter how fancy it is wrong. And the reason why we know that the world is not flat is because Magellan went round it in the 1500s. And if we want to argue about, you know, the flat Earth, then we've got to say, well, if the flat Earth is true, then NASA completely lied to everybody, and the Russians lied to everybody, and anybody who's sent up a satellite around the Earth has lied to everybody, and it's clearly not the case. You can't create that sort of lie with the institutions humans have, and it remain a secret. You know, it's just impossible to do. And then you end up with the fact of, you know, so we got the flat Earth can't work because there's too much evidence to show that it's false. Then you've got the Platonic model that, you know, that everything revolves around the Earth. Well, all we got to do is move to Mars, and we get a different version of the observations. If we go to Venus, we get a completely different version of things. In fact, it becomes bizarre because the day period of Venus versus its orbit is, you know, longer. The day is longer than its orbit, so we end up with a model that just does not work. And we can invent mathematics that supports the model and the evidence, but that doesn't. Mathematics is just a tool to describe what we think's going on. It's not proof that the world works that way, and the universe doesn't go to mathematics high school to figure out how it should operate. And people need to get their head out of that thinking, but you know, they're not going to, because they're getting paid not to do it. You know, the hardest person to convince that they're wrong is the person who's paid to produce the evidence that they're right. And this is what we've got with science in general. You know, you get paid for how many papers you publish. You don't get paid on the basis of how true those papers are, and did you actually read all the resource material that you rely on, and did the reviewer actually read all the side articles that your papers, you know, the whole system is just corrupted. And personally, I believe that, you know, things like the Nobel Prize and all the rest of it should be just abolished. Go and spend the money building people houses and giving them food if that's what you want to do. Make the world better. Stop making guns and selling it.
I don't mind that they have them. I do mind that there's a belief that these are still authentic, you know, systems of, I guess, ways of recognizing people who have done the best work, when the Nobel has done its best to demonstrate that it's become political and unreliable. And
it is political. It's a gravy train. You know, the idea, the academic's goal in America in particular is to become a tenured professor who can't be fired because he's talking bullshit. You know, that amazes me. Or you get the guy in charge of a company who reckons that just his personal effort is worth hundreds and tens or hundreds or thousands of millions of dollars in pay every year, when they insert not a single cent in their company that they run. You know, they're just a worker for somebody else who, you know, it's a bullshit system. Anyway, so I'm going to get past that, and I'm just going to say that we can explain the universe in a nice platonic way if that's really what we want to do and believe all the bullshit we wish, or we can take the other path, which is to try and explain why the things we see happen. Why should they happen?
Oh, but they obviously think that they are doing that.
I walk out on my balcony and look up in the sky, and it happens to be cloudless at the moment, and it's blue. Why should it be blue?
Well, I mean, they have an explanation for that, but whether or not you accept it is another story.
Yeah, well, I can accept it, but, you know, the thing is, the explanation that we have that says why the sky is blue is based on the physical interaction of light photons in a multicolored spectrum hitting a medium which we call air, and it gets scattered. And the thing that gets scattered the most is blue, which is why we have a blue sky.
Yeah, I mean,
take away our light source and it's suddenly a black sky. You know, it's like we've got to get past this sort of instant coffee solution mentality that we have. That, you know, we've been to university and some moron at the front of the stage is paid to spout the same thing semester after semester and is really good at doing that and knows it backwards, has the answers for everything we need. And the easiest way to upset one of these guys is to ask them a question that they can't understand or can't explain. And then you all show them something that shows that their understanding just doesn't work, and they say, oh, it can't happen, that's impossible. And the minute you hear a scientist say that some given data result is impossible. You've got to ask your questions about how good the scientist is in terms of understanding the actual reality of the universe. And that's my test. It's like the test, you know, the person has to come up to you and says, I'm honest. Well, you got to wonder why he's got to say that. So, you know, there are issues I have with academics, and I'm not alone in this reality. You know, that I don't mind being challenged. If someone can show to me that my claim about the oil drop experiment is all it ever measures is the charge due to the electron being there or the electron not being there, and it's never ever managed to measure the electric charge due to the proton. If someone can prove to me that I'm wrong, then fine, produce the proof. But I know I'm right simply for one simple reason. The difference between the mass in an electron and a proton is 1837 point something times. And you cannot, with identical charge values, get a construction that is that way off in terms of material going into it. It is impossible to create a proton that has the electric charge of the negative electric charge of an electron. And I'll go to my grave making that claim. And I know nobody can prove me wrong.
Well,
they
but if
right, can't prove me wrong.
If that is the case, that goes back to my point that maybe the universe doesn't really want us to be able to define things. Maybe that's not the point.
Well, I think it's the point is that we don't want our little environment of understanding upset by anybody. And this is the reason why we have had the bullshit of our history of wars and destructions, you know. And you know, Stalin tried to make the scientists do what he wanted to do, and that worked out really well for the Russians because they got snotted by the Americans. And now it's the Chinese turn to have a go. So, you know, if we're going to live in a religious belief system, then someone's going to come up with the right answer and bowl us over with, you know, technology that wipes us out one way or the other. You know, it might not kill us, but it'll certainly diminish our influence on the world in terms of building devices that are useful. And for those that are watching this, I really recommend you go to Destini's website and you listen to every single video he talks about in his acquisitions of knowledge. It's very important that we understand that our view of what's going on is not necessarily correct. I'm not claiming to have perfect knowledge. You know, I'm not God. Anybody who's inside a human body is finite and therefore ignorant of a lot of things. You know, you go to a bloke and you say, what's it feel like to give birth to a baby? Well, there's absolutely no way known that the man can explain that unless he's a woman.
That's true. No, I agree with that. And
so, you know,
quite the reverse. Lady cannot understand being kicked in the testicles. That's an indescribable experience.
Yeah,
but the thing is, like, if my point is that it may not be absolutely, strictly speaking, necessary for the model to be 100% for it to still be a useful model.
I think what we've got is a model of observation that's very close, right? And therefore,
well, I don't think that our photon model is very close, but I think
I think my photon model works, but the wave model I think is wrong. But, you know, but people are out there will argue against me just as strongly as I do that for my side.
And plus you said you'll go to your grave with it, and also you said that people who think that they have the answers, they're bound to be hit. So you opened yourself up there, but that's okay.
Yeah, well, I'm expecting. I mean, if I'm going to claim to be a scientist, then I expect someone to come along and say, "Oh, look, Rob, you're a complete idiot, and here's why," and that's fine. And if you can do that, then I'll change my tune. But you know, before then, go away, figure it out, and come back with the proof. Don't come back with, I'm an expert, I got a PhD, I've got 70 of them or whatever, because I'm just going to throw you out the door. I'm not interested in listening to you.
I don't think Professor Dave has any of those things.
And Professor Dave, you know, I've got to admire him because he really does try to make the effort proper, but he's got to lift up his game. He's got to go out there and actually, you know, learn
Well,
how to use
I don't admire him at all.
start reading and understanding what's really going on, you know.
I don't admire him at all because I think he's snarky and rude and
Oh, yeah, well, that
the way he
too,
went after the
but
way he went after Gareth told me that
you know,
he wasn't really a true seeker. But that's
no,
just
he's
my
not a true seeker. He's a high school teacher using textbooks. His understanding is not much deeper than what a textbook claims. You know, my claim to Dave, Professor Dave, if he's listening, which he might be, I don't know.
got it.
If you're listening, Professor Dave, please explain to me why two hydrogen atoms and an oxygen atom must produce the outcome that they do.
Well, he's not going to be able to give you.
Well, no chemist, I don't believe any chemist can do it. Nobody can explain the claim or prove to me that the claim is that if I get some hydrogen and oxygen, what is actually going to create water is an actual nuclear reaction where we form neutrons that then disassociate and we have a chemical bond as a result. You know, everybody thinks that these things are different, and they're not. You know, I believe the reason why there's an oxygen to carbon ratio that we observe in the sun's atmosphere is because what we've got is plasma carbon dioxide. And the reason why we don't see
somebody recently
water plasma,
claimed that you couldn't have that.
the reason why we don't see the water ratio molecule, the hydrogen to oxygen ratio that it would correspond to water, is because hydrogen is being transformed into heavier and heavier elements. Anybody who thinks that the sun is a nuclear furnace in the center and it gets colder as you get out doesn't understand what happens in the corona where the temperature goes up to 20 million degrees. And I don't know whether that's Celsius or Fahrenheit, doesn't really matter. But the simple fact is that the sunspots are at about 3,000 degrees and the corona is 20 million. So, you know, if the sun is a nuclear fusion at the core, then the sunspot cannot be 3,000 degrees with a corona of 20 million. The model is wrong. Arthur Eddington got it wrong. He needed relativity to prove his theory that he decided he wanted to have. He believed his model was totally correct with no evidence that it was. And, you know, there's a whole bunch of stuff we've got to, you know, go back and understand what really drove Arthur Eddington in his pontifications. And that was because he was in charge of the Royal Astronomical Society, and he was getting, you know, a good pension and wage and all the rest of it, and he was looked up to as being the, you know, the guru of cosmology, and he was a fraud. I'll make that statement clear to anybody who wants. He was a fraud. He went out in 1917 to get data to prove Einstein is correct. And the data he got was pretty shaky to begin with and was easily explained by other methods. And Edward Dowdy showed with NASA instrumentation of satellites that the sun's gravity does not bend light, but the corona, being a medium, does bend light. And so that, you know, the Einstein model of gravity is bent around a star is not true. It's bent because it went through an optical medium that bent the light. And if you want to understand how that happens, go and watch the Primer video series by David Allen LaPointe. I think he's got it right. I think he's wrong in the sense that he says that everything's magnetic and an electrical is just a side effect. Right. But you know, we've got the other model that says everything's electrical and magnetics is a side effect. You can't have both, guys. It's one or the other.
That brings up exactly why we have the entire PEM model, because the problem with all these guys dividing up is that if magnetism could be everything, then I reckon that people should stop going to church. They should just go to their fridge and pull a magnet off and start talking right into the magnet. You know.
Yeah, but the magnetic field effect is very limited. You know, it doesn't go very far in space before it diminishes.
Well, they just put their lips right to it. You know.
Yeah, I know.
But the thing is that anyway, we've actually, in clinic, I've shown magnetism has almost little to do with it, but the electric field has definitely a lot to do with it. So
yeah,
if the electrical engineers were wrong and David LaPointe was right, then let David LaPointe try and explain my medical research, and he won't be able to.
Well, the issue I have here is I'll caution you, right? I'm not going to say I'm right, but I'll caution you. A magnetic effect requires very close contact or short distances, and electric effects require can work on a longer distance scale.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
but what I'm going to say is, if I can produce magnetic effects, pure magnetic effects from an electrical basis, or pure electrical effects from a magnetic basis, I can't have one or the other being the rule. Both have got to be independent of each other to produce this crossover effect that we see.
Hence the PEM theory. It's very important that people understand this, that they all work upon one another. You really can't understand plasma without electricity. You can't understand electricity without magnetism. You can't really understand magnetism clearly because the sun is showing magnetism in plasma. You've got to have plasma to understand the magnetism. So,
and the bad thing is that
that's a good thing, because then we don't have circular.
There's another thing that I'm going to get to that's going to annoy some people, is that I think temperature is also a charge. Hot and cold is like negative plus and minus electricity, or north-south magnetism. It's actually buried inside the structure, But
there is certainly something very interesting about it, because if it were just infrared energy, then there's not much to explain why in the entire spectrum. We know why color is only showing up in the visible spectrum. It's just because our eyes happen to be designed to see that range. Yeah. Right? There's nothing theoretically why because we make glasses where we can actually see UV light or see infrared light or we could see radio wave light too if we really wanted to. But there's nothing really to prove why temperature is only happening in the infrared spectrum. So there must be something else happening there to do with temperature.
Well, I think temperature
is probably on to write something.
In my speculation, I've made the hard claim that temperature is a charge. Hot and cold is a charge. The reason why the photon.
The Chinese scientists would agree with you. Okay, so in Chinese sciences, that there's a deficient and an excess cold and a deficient and an excess heat. That hot and cold is an actual presence, not only the fact of conduction. The conduction is happening, but that it is not a separate thing. And there are medical reasons for this as well. There are things specific about it. For example, if people enjoy their cold drinks, but they don't want to get sick, one thing that you can do, you can take the drink out of the fridge. You can leave it at room temperature for about 2 to 5 minutes. It will still be very cold relative to your body, right? It will be nowhere near where your body wants it to be in order to avoid hypothermia, but it will cease to have the cold chi that will make you sick. It's only when you take it out, and this is what a lot of Americans, they really love their beers like blisteringly cold almost out of the freezer kind of temperature. That will make you sick. If it doesn't do it today, it will do it fairly soon. And I see those people in clinic. But if they take that Coca-Cola or whatever, and then they will set it on the counter, and when it sweats for just a little bit of time, and it's still very cold, you haven't even opened it yet, then you start to drink it, it won't make you sick in the same way. So there's something that has been impressed or entangled into the beverage that changes its property. And when we see this with superconductivity too, there is something that specifically happens at a specific temperature that changes the property of the superconducting material. And we don't understand that. We really don't understand it. I mean, we just have a magical explanation, which is suddenly there's zero resistivity, which is another way of saying magic.
I made the proposition that there are actually 5 states of matter, and the 5th state is Bose-Einstein condensate. And what that means is all the participating matter in there is resonant aligned to behavior, and the whole thing, you could have a trillion tons of this material and it would all behave in exactly the same way. You wouldn't be able to put a probe anywhere and find something different, which you can't do. So under those conditions,
small plug here, there's superconductivity page on the gateway, just so that people know.
So
okay, go ahead.
for Bose-Einstein condensate, it is required to produce superconducting behavior. Superconducting behavior can be electrical, it can be magnetic, it can be temperature. It is not just what people have been claiming. We've got to be very careful about the fantasy versus the observation. But anyway, so my claim to people that really wanted to go away and play around with weird things is that the fundamental state of matter in the universe, the dominant state of matter in the universe, is not plasma, but the Bose-Einstein condensate expression in matter. So plasma itself can actually behave as a Bose-Einstein condensate.
Yeah, I mean, I have a paper that
what I found amazing at one stage is my colleague said that if I get plasmas, the same gas, so I get hydrogen, I turn it into a plasma, and I have the plasmas, the hydrogen plasma at different temperatures. So let's say I have one at 5,000 degrees, and I have another one at 2,000 degrees, and another one at 10,000 degrees. If I pump all these plasmas into the chamber, these different plasmas at different temperatures will not mix. They refuse to mix until I strobe the entire chamber with EMR, where the plasma absorbs and expels, whatever is causing it to remain hot. So we change the field configurations, and then when they are, approximately the same in terms of temperature, they'll start to mix with each other. But before then, they won't. And this is known phenomenon, but it's not well published. A lot of people would be right now criticizing me immediately for this sort of stuff, but I'm going to say Google search. I'm not interested in listening to people who think they know what's going on. Go and find out for yourself. Don't listen to me pontificate.
My point would just be that I've already produced this paper here, and I talk about what Bose-Einstein condensate is, or I show what others have said. And I would make the point that rather it's probably just a form of ultra cold plasma. But it's an interesting perspective that you're providing. I don't know that it's necessarily its own state so much as another phase shift.
I think it's a phase of matter.
Now they have lots of kinds of phases of matter.
And condensates. I think that when we talk about matter and all the rest of it, I think there's two elements involved. There's the solid, liquid, gas, plasma, condensate version of things, and then there's a solid, liquid. The rigidity of this material. Network node stuff. I've described it in my papers, and I'm doing a very bad job of explaining it now. But there is more geometry involved in these constructions and these material states than is being recognized.
So I agree with that. There's no mention of geometry here in this explanation.
A solid crystalline structure requires specific geometry, and it's rigid. It doesn't transform.
Yeah, they're not really talking about that here. So what they say in the Bose-Einstein cosmologies, they're saying Bose-Einstein condensate is a group of atoms cooled within a hair of absolute zero. They reach that temperature, the atoms are hardly moving. So again, it goes back to movement and structure. They have almost no free energy to do so. To make them, you start with a cloud of diffuse gas.
I couldn't disagree with what you're saying more at the moment, because Bose-Einstein condensates can occur at any number of temperatures.
Let's finish the quote for the audience here. Yeah. Then you cool it with lasers using the beams to take energy away from the atom. That's an interesting idea. So that would prove our idea that laser light's probably actually a circuit rather than particles, right? Because how would you take away energy using something
that you absorb the energy into the frequency?
Right, exactly. So after that, to cool them further, scientists use evaporative cooling with a DEC. You start from a disordered state where the kinetic energy is greater than potential energy. Said this professor of physics at the University of Buffalo. You cool it down, but it doesn't form a lattice-like solid. So in there is no real mention of geometries. At the end there, he does mention the lattice structure.
The problem I have with this quote. The problem I have with this quote is this professor.
Let me finish what I was saying here, because my criticism of their work is that Here, look here. To suggest that present day dark matter may be composed of actively cooled DC would imply a violation of the laws of thermodynamics. It's a sexy theory. Behind the math are glaring logical issues, which I think are insurmountable. They're essentially saying that all of this energy is coming from the Bose-Einstein condensate, because this is their cosmology, right? The Bose-Einstein condensate cosmology. All this energy is coming back out, but in order to create the condensate, they have to apply all this effort in order to create it, and I don't see where they can get one from the other.
Well, the problem
And
I
I
have with
think that rather it's just another space state, is what I would say.
the problem I have with these claims that are being made is the simple fact that Bose-Einstein condensates occur at room temperature. They occur at plasma temperatures. They occur at very cold temperatures. They don't just occur at 170 nanokelvin. This guy here doesn't. He's out there publicating and propagandering his view of how these things work, and there's evidence to show that the claims he is making are not correct. And in terms of, if I want to take energy out of a system, I need an interaction of some kind. And the easiest way to take energy out of a system or put energy into a system is to jostle the fields of the construction somehow. In other words, if I want to get an object to spin really fast, put it on as close to frictionless bearing as I can. Get a ball, stick a little lump of iron somewhere on the ball, set it up on an axle, and then get a pulsing magnetic coil and just get the magnetic field race around that coil. And I'll guarantee you that the ball in the center will spin. And you can spin it at, incredible speeds until it falls apart. So, the way we think things work is not actually how they work. So if I want to cool something with light, well, what I'm going to require is that the light absorb the energy of the thing I'm trying to cool. So there's a transformation. So my expectation is if you watch the laser light that's coming off this cooling process, you would actually see it increase in frequency. You'd see a blue spectrum drift towards the light. The laser light would shift to the blue in the spectrum, because that's the only way you can cool the material. The claims that they're making is not in reality what they're observing, and they're cherry picking their data. They're literally cherry picking it. It's like what Millikan did with the oil drops. He cherry picked the best data because he wanted to be famous.
Before you go to the Millikan, let's go back to the cold plasmas here. So I've pulled up the definition on cold plasmas.
Yes.
Those ones can be, in the 1,000 Kelvin, but the ultra cold plasmas, when it occurs at temperatures as low as 1 Kelvin, which, is still higher than what is listed for the Bose-Einstein. But my point would be that, we have a universe where slight frequency changes will change the entire geometry of how sand aligns itself on top of a speaker. If there is a subtle shift in the Kelvin, and it doesn't mean it's no longer a plasma, it's just how is it arranging itself. Now it's arranging itself into these condensate geometries. And so there's going to be a connection between the condensed matter physics, such as Robitaille is suggesting, and the electric structures as Thornhill and Donald Scott, and originally Ralph Jurgens and Halton HAARP were talking about. The connection of how these things are interacting is going to be the fine, the secret sauce of how it's working, and where the fusion's actually happening, and where's all the energy being produced, that is, of course, giving us life and keeping us going here on this planet. But the point of fact is, it's all nuclear, it's all electrical, it's all magnetic, it's all plasma. It's just that for us, we want to divide it all up, but it's all one force behaving in different ways at different scales
It's
and different
complex.
scales. Scales meaning not only size, but also pressure scales, temperature scales, charge scales,
It's a
various gradients of pressure and voltage.
Yeah, well, my comment would be that we need to understand that what we're looking at is a fractal complex, which has
Exactly.
many characteristics that interact with each other in very specific ways. And because we see these specific interactions, we think that that's what drives this, but it's the complex that drives it. Everything in terms of when we look at what I call an electromagnetic discharge, this is a transfer of energy from one location to another with matter, and matter is made up of stuff that is electrically and magnetic responsive. So you have a discharge of electric and magnetic material, that's electromagnetic material, that's going from point A to point B, and it's an energy transfer, and that energy transfer can be with particles. It can be with photons, which is a different type of matter, electrons, protons, atoms, and then there's the seed block material that I'm talking about, the seed from which everything is constructed. That has all the characteristics that we're seeing in electrons and protons and atoms and everything else. So that the actual building blocks will respond to this discharge process. So we've got to understand that an electromagnetic discharge mechanism, a circuit, is instant switch on. Instant switch on. It doesn't. There might be a delay in terms of reading arriving at some resonant state in terms of polarity of the magnetics and electrics and whatever else you want to put in there. But that circuit is set up to instantly switch on because that's the way the matter behaves at all levels of construction. And the reason why the electrons, we get a particle accelerator, and as Walt Thornhill said, is that he thinks that it's, it absorbs constructional matter to make it more rigid so that you're pushing it along. And anybody who's tried to push a soap bubble will understand what the difficulty is. The electron is like a soap bubble. For it to go faster and faster and faster through the environment, which is trying to slow it down and keep it to a certain speed, it needs the bubble to become, more and more solid. Now, the problem with that is the electron can absorb a lot of material from the aether to make it solid, but there's a trade-off. The electron has a constructional dynamic which makes it stable, but it also has a constructional dynamic that makes it unstable. And if I overload the constructional matter, I flip from something that is constructionally stable to something that's constructionally unstable. And while we talk about a collision in a high-speed cyclotron or whatever, linear accelerator, the question is did the electron or the proton or the photon actually hit the particle, or did it get jiggled in such a manner that its unstable resonance overpowered its stability resonance, and the thing just simply exploded, and all the absorbed aethic material gets thrown out because it's not required anymore. And in the process of throwing it out, the environment is trying to absorb that aethic expression, and it creates a transitory rain of particles that we misinterpret as the quantum plethora of made-up particles that don't live very long. But what we've really got is a whole series of construction where the environment is trying to produce a stable, balanced, charged environment where everything cancels out and disappears. It's all about producing a neutral environment if we possibly can. Well, that doesn't always happen. But anyway, this is all interesting stuff, I suppose, but we need to move on to the other topic you wanted to cover.
That's true.
A volcano.
That's true. The mega tsunami. So
the big
now
volcano.
I posted a little Palma thing, and immediately Aaron he found some stuff disproving this person's particular theory about it being a directed energy attack. Now, if I will say right now, if I were the New World Order of China, I wouldn't need a directed energy weapon to set this off. I would just have a black ops team come and exploit it, and I'd be able to wipe out America and a whole lot of other enemies pretty quickly. And so I reckon it's probably not
I do. If I want to
being
play
set
that
up. I
game,
think there's a electrical
I'd put,
engineering or electrical circuit connections.
I'd,
And also, I
I'd,
want to direct people. Hold on one second. I want to direct people to the HAARP video from Curious Droid, and he talks about why HAARP is not capable of actually producing the directed energy weapon attacks that people think that it is. But I think it'd be an interesting discussion about La Palma and the global or planetary electric circuit and solar system electric circuit connection.
okay.
So I thought I'd open it up for that.
What I'll just get to this, the directed weapon energy bullshit. The
Well,
Russians.
I mean, those are real.
The Russians in the 50s had come up with a design bomb that basically got a freighter, a waterborne ship, and turned it completely into a nuclear bomb. And the plan was to, put these off on either side of the United States, one off California, the other off the Atlantic, and detonate the damn things underwater. Now, to get your head around what we're talking about is the Russians detonated a 150 megaton bomb in the atmosphere in the 50s or 60s, whenever it was, and it was a huge explosion. But we're talking about an atomic bomb that's the size of a shipping freighter, 90 feet of boat or whatever it is. Now that's a very big bomb, and you're talking gigaton or above range. So we're talking 1,000 megatons or bigger, and okay, yes, that is going to create a fairly large wave. It's probably going to crack the crust if the geology understanding is correct, and there would be a big problem. But it wouldn't be just a problem for America; it'd be a problem for the globe. And that's the reasons why the Russians didn't do it is they figured out that it's a bad idea. Now, directed weapons that produce volcanoes or get them going is, another bad idea, because it's not.
Of course,
it's not
it's a
just
bad idea. I don't think
it affects
good idea.
everybody. It's not a. It's the idea of weapons is to make sure that the effect that you desire to have happens over there and not over here.
Well, if you are in the air, you wouldn't worry about it.
But
And
there's
the mega tsunami, but it wouldn't go around the entire world. That's another thing.
no, that's exactly correct.
Not go
However,
it would be an excellent way to take out America.
When Krakatoa went off in 1887, I think it was, or was it 89? Anyway, it produced a tidal response on the other side of the globe in England. There was it was actually measured when it happened. So,
But it wasn't deadly.
it was deadly. It was deadly within 1,000 kilometers of Krakatoa. But it wasn't globally destructive. And then you got the earthquake that happened in Chile in the 60s, which was a 9 point whatever, and the tsunami actually hit Japan, and it wasn't 20 feet tall. It was a 2 foot wave or something like that. The Fukushima wave, it went in the opposite direction, the one that happened off the coast of Fukushima and caused problems for their nuclear reactors there. The wave, when it got to the other side of the Pacific, was I think it was a meter wave or a bit higher, and people were stupid enough to get too close to the water and figure that they could stand up. But a lot of people don't understand that a meter of water is a ton pressure sideways. And for those that don't understand how tall a meter is, we're talking 3 feet, a yard. And so a yard of vertical distance in water is a ton of pressure sideways. Your body bones will break if you suffer a sideways pressure of 1 ton or more. So so going racing down to the sea to watch.
But the discussion here that I'm trying to
watch what, yeah.
That there's the
So in terms of this,
versus the direct energy, because people think that they're constantly being attacked, and it may actually be that the they're responding to the Earth's Schumann resonance, and the Schumann resonance is responding to the changes of the planetary and solar system electric circuit interaction, which is really a discussion about the PIMS versus the Hajim, or the so-called spheres of heaven versus the spheres of earth. This interaction that we feel on the planet because we are small organisms upon the skin of a complex chemical interface that we call the crust of the earth. And we're very small compared to the crust, and the crust is very, very thin compared to the spheres of the earth and the spheres of heaven.
Okay.
So the pressure differences exerted on us would, of course, cause us to feel certain effects. Be my point.
That's, I mean, yeah, okay, right, yeah, pressures and all the rest of it. What we need to understand is that weather systems are electromagnetic phenomena. You know, this idea of a hot and cold, high and low, hot and cold pressure systems is not quite correct. It's actually an electrical phenomenon, and
right.
And what it's being driven by strongly is the water molecule, which is a very powerful dielectric. So, you know, the water in the atmosphere stays up there because of electrical potential requirements. You know, every meter in height, you get you get 100 volts or whatever in electrical potential. So the clouds are suspended, the water is suspended in the atmosphere due to the capacitance of the atmosphere itself. So the electrical charge of the water molecule is what causes it to suspend itself in the air. And eventually you get to the point where the charge capacitance of the water is neutralized, and the water's got no choice but to fall down because it's no longer being kept in the air electrically. When we come to volcanoes,
briefly before you go to volcanoes, let's give people some images that they can use. So here are the so-called spheres of heaven, the exosphere, thermosphere, mesosphere, etc. And then above that actually is your ionosphere. And then here we have a number of different currents. These are currently accepted. This is a NASA publication. These are the various kinds of electric and magnetic currents that are happening above the Earth. And then we have the inside the Earth. We have the various spheres of the Earth, in which the crust is actually a thinnish membrane. That if the Earth was reduced to a marble in God's hands, he actually would not feel the roughness of the mountains. They're actually very thin comparatively, and so we have these various pressure gradients inside of the Earth, and these pressures are both causing things to go sink towards the center and also to be exuded by the mantle outwards. Namely, there's some form of water that's being extruded by these so-called oceans inside the mantle, and it collects on the bottom of the well, particularly the Gulf of Mexico is one of the places where they found this form of water. It's like a heavy water, and it may actually be that the Earth is actually producing this water, and inside it may also be producing, by the way, oil. And so this leads to my discussion of what I call the electrothermal vine, where you have the so-called heavy, the heavy elements coming from the sun and the solar wind, and it's actually going into the north and the south pole. So we're on if we were a tomato, we'd have a vine from both ends, and then there are all these processes that are happening potentially in the inside the Earth, maybe even inside the Earth's core, that can produce various forms of water. And this is actually these are the proposed processes from Sapphire Phase 1, whereby there could have been results that led to fusion that they were finding in their very first experiment. So there's lots of different processes that they identified as quite possible, all of them involving hydrogen, electrons, hydrogen and electrons.
So
it looks like some helium too. But.
So we're getting material coming from the sun, precipitating on the Earth. We're getting material from our own ionosphere precipitating on the Earth. So the nuclear fusion is occurring throughout the solar system, and it's very important for people to understand that it's not just the sun that's a nuclear reactor of fusion. All the planets that have got an active rotating magnetic field have a nuclear fusion process in their ionospheric structures. And the reason why we don't observe that for Venus yet is because the ionosphere is yet to develop in such a way as to cause the planet to rotate in the prograde direction that the rest do. But, I've made speculation about that, and whether I'm right or not, I don't know, it's to be seen. But if we were able to look at the Earth correctly, I would.
Here's the actual sapphire double, by the way. So this
is plasma charging layering mechanism. So what you've got is a series of shells. If you could discharge, if you went back to that the sapphire image you just had, if you were able to put a conductor through that shell structure and actually touch the same thing in the center, the metal in the center, you would see a discharge through the plasma down that channel. So if that ball had spikes coming out of it, you wouldn't get that shell structure because there'd be electrical discharge or magnetic electric discharge into the base. But the Sapphire project is, I think, the correct model for understanding how the sun works and stars do. And the traditional gravity-driven model is wrong. And the image you've got there of the Crab Nebula, that you have there, Crab Nebula, if you see the animated version of that and then have a look at David LaPointe's little ion engine, you will see the same behavior in the ionic structure. You'll see these rotating ring spirals of material.
Of course.
And this is the reason why I think David LaPointe is actually observing real stuff that occurs out there in the cosmology. The problem he has is he's throwing away electricity, but he's showing in a lab behavior that we observe with our telescopes. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm more prepared to listen to a David Allen LaPointe view of how this cosmology works than I am to the cosmologist, because he's got it there in the lab. He's got an experiment that shows.
But I'm more prepared to listen to Langmuir and Alphen and Birkeland, because not only are they mainstream, but they're more primal, and they're just being ignored. And that part bothers me.
They are being ignored by the people who want to play around with gravity. Now, the issue here is that there's a complex behavior going on here, and it's going to take multiple minds to figure out all the detail. And when we get David,
here's what I know is that you brought up carbon dioxide plasma earlier. Normally it doesn't form a plasma. In fact, if you put dry ice in your microwave, you're not going to get a plasma. You need to use carbon monoxide, which is why we use smoke, and make sure that you do it under a Pyrex glass, because it will get hot. But the thing is, like, when you look in deeply into the issue of covalent bonding, first of all, you discover two things. One is that it's not the covalent bonding that prevents it from being plasma. It's the fact of carbon dioxide's nonpolar structure. Because if it's a covalent bond and it's polar, at high temperatures, you actually could get a plasma. You can get ionization. And then also that Langmuir himself, while doing plasma research, he's the one who discovered the covalent bonding, and he received a Nobel Prize in chemistry for it. And so the thing is that we are having our community ignored by these gravity cultists, and it's not just grant money. I made the joke in the paper that it's not grant money, it's cult money, but it really is actually an issue, because here we have very mainstream. This is mainstream physics here. This discussion of the various shells of current going around Saturn here, going around the Earth. They know about these connections. This is not controversial. I'm not speaking of some kind of woo, Nassim Haramein stuff here. This is well-known physics. But what they don't allow is for it to then come through to the media, the science media that put out, and then instead they'll swap every discussion from this. You'll see a discussion of so-called magnetic engines here, or they'll talk about dynamos. But they won't tell you, they won't use the word electric or they won't use electron. And in fact, that was my response in the Schnoll, the Schnoll paper, is that in the entire discussion, nowhere in it is it talking about electrons or ions, etc. In fact, obviously, I'm not able. This guy was claiming to have actually personally known Professor Schnoll. Okay, so it's very hard to attack a guy who's claiming that he's able to talk to Professor Schnoll and get the direct information. And it's a very useful paper in telling you what the Schnoll effect is and talking about the history of general relativity and where people are misunderstanding general relativity, and even talking about the whole faster than light light speed issue correctly. This is all true, but if you search his paper, zero references to electron, magnetic fields, or to charge. No references to protons or neutrons. No references to ions, isotopes, leptons, or baryons. Okay, the only references there are to photons here. There's 2 references to virtual photons, and 10 references to these so-called zero particles. So we have a problem where the cosmology that they're coming with, they pick and choose whenever they want from our cosmology to bolster their argument. It's sort of like the Mad Hatter. It's sort of the Mad Hatter dinner party, because they're busy talking nonsense, but every once in a while, would you like a cup of tea? And then they actually pour a cup. But then they take that cup of tea and they slice it in half, or they bite the plate instead of the thing, or they dip the plate in the tea, and they're never actually talking about the actual dinner party. You go round and round. Alice is going, wondering when she'll actually get to drink a cup of tea at this Mad Hatter unbirthday party. And that is exactly what is happening in the Big Bang cosmology. They will talk about all sorts of crazy ideas, much crazier than Bose-Einstein condensate. But then when they need to, they'll dip into the plasma electromagnetism in order to prove it. And when you get down to it, every particle and subatomic particle in all of quantum physics, their mass is measured in electron volts. Every single one. They're all measured in electron volts. So fundamentally, they know that it's charged. They just don't want to talk about it. They don't want to couch it in terms of charge. They want to talk about inertia in other terms. They want to talk about mass in other terms. But they know that it's charged. They're just not telling people, and they're getting away with that. And I have a real problem with that. I mean, personally. Did I lose you, Robert? Hello? Hello?
Anyway, sorry, I just
Still there?
I just had to disappear for a second.
Oh no, it's okay. I was worried I had my call drop.
It's too, Ramon.
It's all good. The statements you're making are quite true. I mean, what we're seeing in your criticism of this paper is the deliberate falsification of evidence. You know, this guy's getting paid to write stories about quantum and dark energy and gravity models. And for him to maintain his pay, he has got to keep coming out with that story. And anything that interferes with that story has to be ignored. It's just like the archaeology in the Egyptian environment, the Eddington's, the people who were on Eddington's observation team in 1917 disagreed with him. They actually had it out with him, but he was, the famous guy. He couldn't fucking close him down. And he was able to make his lie work. Now, these guys are not interested in anybody showing them up as being wrong. And their pay packet depends on it, and their status depends on it, and their Nobel Prize depends on it. So, money and fame and cultist followers are incredible motivators in people's ethics, and we forget this in science. That scientists are beings that want to be famous, they want to be rich, and they want to have their sycophantic groupie following that tells them how smart they are.
The guy makes an interesting. He has an entire, paragraph or two. I think it's 2 paragraphs talking about tachyons, but they've never been observed in any single experiment. They're completely a thought particle. They've never been ever observed.
I have a colleague who would totally disagree with him because he's.
Well, he can totally disagree with me, but
you see, I was going to say.
And here's the thing: is okay.
He has.
You can talk about. I don't care if Pearson talks about tachyons, but if in their paper they make 0 references to electric, electron, magnetic fields, charge, or protons or neutrons, ions, isotopes, leptons, or baryons, there is a problem.
Yeah, because he's ignoring matter.
He's ignoring reality.
Well, he's ignoring
and he's getting away with it because he happens to be friends with Professor Snow.
Yeah, well, that's a problem. But getting back to tachyons, my partner that I'm working with at the moment has actually
built. We were talking about the electric circuit.
Has built devices that detect tachyons. They exist. I
would love to review that work if it gets on my desk. You're not going to get to it. You're not going to get to it for the very simple fact that the technology we're talking about has military applications. So they're not going to allow this material to be published. And I'm going to remain skeptical. And then the thing is that's my job.
But there was a conference. There was a conference about tachyons, and there was one guy.
My job is to remain skeptical. The point is that we have a real. Okay, people are latching onto the directed energy weapon. But they're missing the fact that there is a de facto electric connection between, there's an analog DC and AC connection between the bodies of the solar system.
Correct.
I mean, this is a well-known fact. It's not controversial. You will see people like Professor Dave pretend that what we are saying is like the flat Earth. Those people are idiots. Okay, there's this guy, Bob Smith, and he's probably going to follow and troll on my channel because he trolls on the others. He is the equivalent of the Spanish Inquisition saying that Galileo has no proof, and so therefore, or the Jesuits or whoever it was that was giving Galileo the hard time, because at the time Galileo had no other peer review studies that he could point to prove that the world that it was a heliocentric model, right? All he had was Copernicus's model. Copernicus had died, right? He didn't release his stuff until he died. So Galileo standing on his own against everybody, and this guy is saying that that's not possible to change the model. Hold on a second. He's saying it's not possible to change the model because we don't have textbooks. Well, we do actually factually have textbooks, right? It's called The Electric Currents in Geospace and Beyond, and I will pull that up while we're discussing. But this is a well-known. We actually have a proof that there are these electric currents in space. You can go to phys.org though, and they'll say that you can't break down the permittivity of free space. It's almost like we're living in 2 different realities.
It's total rubbish. Can I go back to Galilei?
Yeah, absolutely.
The problem that Galileo had was this: you had the Catholic Church, which is totally dominate in the life of poor old Galileo at the time, who had a cosmological model that said that the Earth was flat, and that you had the celestial spheres of the Platonic model, and that was church dogma. Belief that is how God arranged the universe. And the problem was that in the Council of Nicaea in 460 something AD, there was a discrimination between what the world, how God makes things and how God orders things to occur. Now, the world does the universe operates according to what God wants to do it, and not according to human belief. And human belief said that the entire universe revolves around the Earth. The only reason why the Earth exists is because, you know, God made man. Well, if that was the reason, why do we have stars, and why did we have the planets, and why did we have anything else other than the Earth? You know, if it was that critical to God, why did he need to do it? So the issue here was we had a belief system of how the universe was arranged, which was completely out of line with the actual founding fathers of the Catholic Church. And it said that God arranges the universe according to the way he wants it, not according to the way we want it. The believer's understanding of how it's arranged is irrelevant to God. God does what he wants to do. He's not going to come around monkey grinding for the created creature who's supposed to, you know, bend down and lick the ground because God walked by. You know, that's not the right behavior. So you have a church power structure which was political and temporal as well as spiritual, saying this is the way the world works. And along comes Galileo with his telescope and a few other things, and shows that first of all the sun is not a disk; it's actually a rotating ball of gas, and it's not a perfect sphere because there's holes in it and black dark spots. And oh, by the way, that planet we call Jupiter has got things orbiting it. Right? And what it showed in those just simple observations is that the fact that everything revolved around the Earth was false. It wasn't just, you know, a case of being, you know, misinterpreted. It was totally wrong, because if everything revolved around the Earth, what the hell are these moons going around Jupiter out there doing? You know, it throws the model out instantly. And what you've got at the time is the church was in huge argument with the Reformists. The Reformation was, you know, all on high steam because, you know, a Catholic priest had gone up to the local church and whacked on it with a nail his issues with, you know, plenary indulgences and all the rest of it, and kicked off a debate that happened at a time when the royal families of Europe were struggling with political issues with the church itself. They wanted the power and the church didn't want to give it, and so on. So what you ended up with was not an argument about how the universe was organized, but an argument about who was going to say what was going to be acceptable in terms of running.
Of course, that is no different than what's happening with the Michael Shermers of the world. Is that they're saying that there's or the climate change. That's it's the settled science idea, which is of course complete nonsense, and we don't need to get too much into a rail here. But I do want to point out to people that it is not only the Wiley text that I have posted here for people to see. You know, this electric current, which people should get, and it's not only Ben Davidson's textbook. But if this Bob Smith was an educated person instead of a complete moron, he would know that on phys.org there's a discussion of thin current sheets in space. There is a discussion of something called the Musca sheet, which is a giant electric sheet in space. Then there's a NASA article. This is nasa.gov, electric currents from space, talking about dynamos in space, Birkeland currents in space. And then there's this other article from the EUS, also the Astrogeophysical Union, talking about electric currents in outer space running the show. And so showing these electric currents. Of course, this also goes back to a citation of the same book. And a funny little thing in the comments. So you're saying, in fact, we live in an electric universe, and Neil Wilkes says, of course we are. So, you know, this is a matter of fact. It is not a matter of conjecture. It doesn't matter whether the guy from Uncharted X likes it or not. It doesn't matter whether Professor Dave likes it or not. It is the actual factual existence that you are in. It is not just because you happen to be using electronics and everything that you're seeing is electrical circuits because of, the light is an electric circuit, and that you are hearing my voice because of the transmission of electric signals that are being then translated back into sound waves. It is the total factual reality that you are living in is the PEM reality. It is inescapable. There is no way for you to get around it. You can attack it. You can be zealot of the general relativity and dark universe cosmologies. You can be a shill for a standard model, which is itself a jigsaw puzzle that is failing to connect its pieces and leaving massive holes in it and claiming to have the whole picture. But you will never, ever escape. It's just like Galileo says, it moves anyways. You will never escape the factual reality that there is electric currents in space. This is not up for discussion. It is not a matter of debate. You have lost before you've started. We have no time for you, and I have no reason to give you my time because this information is widely available to the public since at least 2012 when this phys.org article came out.
Well, it's been available.
But at least 2012, but it has been available for hundreds of years. And our cosmology is the primary cosmology. It pre-existed Newton, and it pre-exists Lord Kelvin, and all of the black hole theory people. They have all been we have primary papers that go back before. I had a woman who claims she thinks of herself as a scientist because she's a sex therapist or whatever. And when I cited Ralph Jurgen's paper, she said, "Oh, a paper from 1982." It's like, well, yeah, that's the point. Is that now, 40 some years later, they're admitting that they can measure the electric fields and coming off the sun, but they're 40 years after the party. And then he came, of course, after Hans Alfvén. And Alfvén came after Langmuir. And Langmuir came after Birkeland. And Birkeland came after all the guys in the 1800s who came after Gilbert of De Magnete. Yes. And so these cosmologies pre-existed the cult of the Einstein, really the bishop Lemaitre. They pre-existed it. We don't have to defend ourselves. They have the extraordinary claims. We don't have extraordinary claims. We have totally ordinary claims.
We can't prove gravity does it. And that's the important thing to understand. And further, for the solar system to operate, the gravity field cannot, if it's gravity that's driving it, the gravity field cannot travel at the speed of light and give us a solar system we experience. And if you don't believe me, go away and do your motional mechanics using gravity and the standard classic physics model, and you will discover that there is no way you can produce the stable model of the solar system we have using gravity. It just does not work.
Maybe Andy could correct me, but I do believe I saw somewhere someone even mentioned that you don't even need Newton. Yes. But from Kepler's laws of motions themselves, you can describe the inertial effects that you see in the planets. That you don't even need Newton's law of gravity to do that. It is a convenient equation, but you can actually just use Kepler's laws of motion and the conservation of momentum, and you will come up with the same results, or close enough to get a satellite there. Which tells you that gravity is only a model and ever only was a model. It was never a description of the actual, factual, what is happening. So anyways, that was my epic PIM rant for the night, my plasma electromagnetic sky rant. I wanted us to get a little bit more deep into the planetary electric circuit, but I think that we'll do it next time because I'm getting a little bit worn out, and I'd like to wrap it up.
I'm just going to say that
go ahead.
Electrical discharges into volcanoes is part of the reason why we have volcanoes. And if we're going to talk,
I agree. We should definitely do a super volcano. Yeah.
If we're going to talk about the Chicken Little effect, which is, if this volcano blows up and all the rest of it, the thing that's going to be critical here is a half mv squared, which how big the wave is when it gets to the coast of Florida is going to depend upon how much of the island gets evaporated and sunk into the sea, because it's going to create a pulse. And what matters there
Yes.
is how many cubic kilometers or cubic miles of material end up in the water. And given that this is a really hot environment, like, it'll vaporize water instantly, you're going to get systolic shock waves in the water as huge quantities of water get boiled away into the atmosphere. So you're going to have a dirty great big steam jet up into the ionosphere. And all sorts of effects are going to go on. Now, this is all based on the fact that the claim being made is that this volcano is going to fall apart and create a water version of Mount St. Helens. And if it does,
Well,
yes.
I'm gonna put a link to the Curious Droid video, and people can decide for themselves if they think it's more likely that little old humans with their poor understanding of electromagnetism are controlling the volcano, or if there is more likelihood that currents that are beyond human comprehension in terms of our daily experience and forces of gradients and electric connections from space are producing the kind of energies that are necessary to drive the engine that we see at La Palma and other supervolcano and caldera systems like Yellowstone and Hawaii, etc.
The only
In which
thing I
case,
got,
next time it'd be good for us to discuss the Professor
the thing,
Mayle's theory of neutrinos and also DeCinti's theory of crustal collapse. So I think that that would be a good discussion for us to have.
the thing we need to understand about claims made about HAARP and other things is that we need to understand how a transistor works. And what we're saying is a tiny amount of electrical voltage or amperage will allow the switch on of a large discharge or turn it off. And this is very important to understand. So although HAARP is supposed to be playing around, if we're able to switch on something with a little bit of power that's going to cause a disaster, then yeah, we've got a problem. But it's not that these things don't work. It's the things that we do not understand what's going on in the first place. We don't understand what the electrical circuit of the Earth is. And remember that I'm saying it's an electromagnetic circuit, but
we're getting there.
We've been driven by a model for the last 100 years almost now of a gravitationally driven, it's 120 years, a gravitationally driven model. And
uniformitarianism itself has been over 160 years, and that's a problem.
We don't have proof that there's a gravity particle, and we don't have a proof that there's a gravity charge. But what we have proof of is that there's electrical particles that have magnetic properties, and that causes electrical and magnetic interactions. And we got nice little toys to play with, like the internet and the mobile phone and any other number of stuff. But all you have to do is wire up one of these transistors the wrong way or build them up the right way, and they'll explode. It's not like it's hard to do. You wire up.
For the audience, and then we'll close on this. The discussion of transistors, of course, relates to discussions of semiconduction, and the ability of these properties. Usually, they're silicon related, to sometimes conduct, sometimes not conduct, and of course, we can use this to create, a non-physical switch. So instead of an on and off physical motion of the switch, creating connection to control the ability of current to flow from E to C by controlling the voltage at E. And if the Earth, well, let's start with the sun. If the sun is acting as a transistor, then we could be in trouble. And there have been times the solar wind has actually dropped off, and so there's some evidence that the sun can behave as a transition. As far as the Earth, I don't know if the Earth has the capability or not, because it's such a good storage of through its capacitive shells. I don't know, because of the way it conducts, but I would say that there are certain structures on the planet definitely that could act as a form of transistor, a kind of a switch where some current is flowing sometimes and sometimes isn't flowing. And I'd say that there are identified properties in the feng shui and geomantic traditions throughout the world where they indicate that. Now, if the volcano is acting as a switch, It could be either as a pressure relief, or it could just be the side effect of this explosive event that you're talking about. So the sudden current in this circuit may be creating the side effect being the superheating of the molten material. And but the downside I have, the issue I have with that model is that the Earth is constantly rotating, and so it would be very difficult to explain a constant so-called flux tube or Birkeland current coming from the sun into just La Palma. Now, if the entire planet is undergoing it, that's another story. But then you would have to wonder why other volcanoes aren't behaving the same way. So I would like to pick up the
how much of the
next
circuitry
time.
how much of the circuitry is active. Now, if my claim about the Earth
Yeah, we
being
don't
a
know.
star, if my claim about the Earth being a star and the sun is a star and these things behave like transistors, stars behave like transistors, then the sort of stuff we're talking about becomes very real. And volcanoes are just, different discharge conduit paths that are occurring in this circuit. It's not just one conductor involved. There's a series of conductors, which when you look at the NASA photographs that show all these looped magnetic channels all over the place, that's indication that there are conduction locations of conduit that electromagnetic energy travels.
My headpiece is dying. Let's pick it up with an
Okay.
electrical geological discussion next time.
Yep.
And we'll get into supervolcanoes and Professor Mayle's theory and DeCinces theory of crustal collapse, etc. And thank you everybody for joining. And I will talk to you guys again soon this week. I'm going to go ahead and hit the stop recording.
Yeah.